Now I want to talk about, finish up alfalfa. And we kind of ran all over this part of it when we were together last. And I want to talk about harvesting alfalfa because it is really crucial we understand how this works and what's going on. Alfalfa grows in cycles. How long is their growth cycle in alfalfa? What's that, 4 weeks? Yeah, 30 days, a month, 4 weeks, thereabout. That's good. So you're cutting every 30 days. When you get to about 4 weeks, and imagine, that growth curve, what's happening? What do you expect to see? You expect it to be vegetative or start to see flowers at 4 weeks? Flowers. Yeah, because remember, alfalfa grows multiple cycles, multiple flushes of growth during the year. And at about 4 weeks, it's going to start flowering. Okay. When it flowers, that's the signal to the roots, right? That's the control alt delete experience in a sense. When it makes seed up there, which takes a lot longer than 4 weeks, but then the new shoots start coming. So if you don't cut it in, say, 5 weeks or 6, you've got new shoots coming up from the bottom because the plant says, I have made seed, your turn as a shoot is over and I'm going to make a new set. And we've talked about alfalfa seed production in the West. They just let it grow up and make multiple flushes during the year. They actually put bees out with the alfalfa to help it pollinate. Alfalfa as a flower evidently is very aggravating to bees. But in order to trip it and get the pollen, part of the flower whacks the bee in the face. So you have to have a lot of bees, right? Because if the bee gets really smart, it's probably going to go somewhere else to get some pollen, right? So anyway, they have bees, and then they spend more on bees than we make an acre. They can spend $300, $400 an acre on bees. I mean, it's just when you think of California agriculture and the scale, just multiply everything by 10 or more. How much they spend by 10, how much they make by 10. So that's alfalfa. Now, harvesting alfalfa we do it about every 30 days, and we do it, let's see where we are here, to manage the carbohydrates. We will probably just wear this topic out for you, but thinking about the carbohydrate status in the plant is really crucial to knowing, can I graze it more? Is it time to cut it? Am I stressing the plant? What's happening to the reserves? What's happening to the savings account that the plant has? Alfalfa, the regrowth of it, is 100% dependent on stored carbohydrates, 100%. So when you cut it and you remove the shoots, hopefully before we get into the seed stage, right, then the roots have to push out the new growth totally at the expense of carbs at the root. The lowest point in the carbohydrate reserve cycle is about 6 to 8. Well, that first week to 10 days when it's about 6 to 8 inches tall, okay? Because at that stage, you say, well, there's plenty of green tissue there, and there will be, but it's so immature that it is not yet a net producer. It's still feeding itself, if you will, right? I think back, I like this analogy, and I hope it holds together for a long period of time, but it's like my daughter, right? Is an adolescent she's still a net importer of goods, right, of resources. When she started working and paying some of her own bills, then that's like that shoot that's actually putting some stuff back into the roots, right? Not completely self-reliant yet, but putting some stuff back. But you can see that after about a week to 10 days, then the carbohydrate status in the roots starts to go back up. And then that happens multiple times during the season. Now, it's not like you're not going to get electrocuted if you cut it when it's a week old, right? There may be weed control times you may cut it when it's a week old. There are multiple things may happen, and that's what you choose to do. But you've realized, though, that you have then stressed that plant, right? So you want to make sure that everything else you can do makes up for that. Fertility, soil fertility, fertilizer, you want to make sure it's got all that it needs. You let the next growth come back and maybe get into the full bloom stage so that it's way up here at the top, right? When we're trying to you're trying to time a harvest timing is obviously driven by rain, because this producer, I mean, he's a very mathematically driven person. He knows, and he makes 20, 30, 40,000 square bales a year. Okay. So he's done it, right? He knows how many baling days he gets in a year. So he knows he gets about 45 to 50 baling days a year. Last year, he only got 24 baling days. So rainfall really created havoc for this producer last year, and there's no fixing that. There's no fixing that. He had less premium hay to sell. He had to sell more through livestock, market it. In fact, I went down there, among other things, I wanted to see them feeding some alfalfa hay to cows for a publication we're doing to make some pictures, okay? So we want to return to the pre-cut level of carbs, and that happens by early bloom to late bloom. So, and then you want to harvest again on the 30-day cycle, 30 to 35. Cut it 2 inches, and red clover has a similar cycle. Cutting at 2 inches, the cutting height is there are a lot of factors that go into that. The cutting height is a mechanical thing too. The mower itself, some mowers can only cut at 2 inches. So Ben, I think I asked you, does your mower, can you guys raise it easy?
One we can, one we can't.
One you can, one you can't.
The disc mower, it's just kind of,
it's set.
It lays on those shoes you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly right.
But our mower conditioner, you can adjust.
You can adjust. With alfalfa, because remember I told you the harvest event is a control-alt-delete experience for the plant. When you harvest it, it's got to start over no matter what. So it really doesn't care whether you cut it at 4 inches or 2 inches. Cutting it taller, if you have grass with it, particularly orchard grass, will help make the orchard grass stay vigorous. And we've seen that picture at least once where we cut orchard grass too low and it comes back very slowly. You may want that. I mean, you may decide that the field you want to be, that the orchard grass is actually getting a little thick in alfalfa during part of its production life. And so therefore you can cut it lower to 2 inches and the orchard grass will suffer. The alfalfa doesn't care. So the alfalfa gets ahead. The higher you cut it, the more the advantage goes to the orchard grass. And that may be to your benefit. Certainly if you're trying to make the orchard grass last as long as it can, cutting it 4 inches, is going to be the way you do it. Okay. Red clover, very, very similar, although we don't really give red clover much attention. It only lasts 2 years or 2 growing seasons. And basically people just cut red clover when they feel like it. I mean, when the weather's right, and they don't really watch it like alfalfa because it's cheaper to establish, it's less stand life. It just doesn't get as much respect to use the Rodney Dangerfield analogy. So harvesting it for hay, we should base it on the growth stage, but I'm not gonna, let's talk about that. You can see in the literature that you want to cut it first flower to 10% bloom. I've never counted blooms. So 10% bloom is a judgment call. When you start seeing blooms, you should be ready to make hay. If you are a cash hay producer, you were looking at that field the week before, because if you get a good window of weather and it's not quite bloomed yet, you take that cutting, because that cutting then sets up the next one. Particularly if we get like this. This is the weather pattern we're having right now is really nice for multitudes of things. We can spray broadleaf herbicide on grasses. We've got the temperatures up. The weeds are at the right stage. They're still immature. We can get some really nicer weather in the latter part of April. And if the weather gets right, hay producers will take the cutting, because and many times they'll take the cutting even when the weather isn't right, because then it sets up the next one, right? So if the first week in May is going to be rainy and you only have one curing day, then a lot of times they'll cut it and they'll wrap it wet. We'll talk about that. That way, the June the 1st cutting, the 1 month later cutting, is hopefully in a better time, right? But if you wait, that first cutting, which typically has bigger stems and is not as high in quality, you have more yield that you can't sell, for example, because that won't bring the price that the bale on the right will bring. Okay, so the academic answer for when you cut hay is always when the stem is going from reproductive to vegetative. If that's, and so for cool season grasses, that happens once a season. And that happens around the first week or two in May, depending on where you are in Kentucky. For regrowth of cool season grasses, now they've made their seed head and they make it once a year. The regrowth will be all leaves, right? And for a grass like orchard grass, that hay is very valuable. Okay. Okay. So you do base it on growth stage, but weather drives so much. Okay. So growth stages tells you when, and you know after a period of time when it's going to get to that stage, at least the first cutting. Then you're looking at the weather to decide, am I going to cut early, cut late? What am I going to do? Okay. I simply remember whenever you talk about stage of the cut hay, bud to first flower for alfalfa, or boot stage to early head with grasses. I will try to get a good picture of boot. The boot stage of a grass is when the seed head has started to go up the stem. So there's a stem and the seed head is swollen, or the stem is swollen at the top, but the leaves are still wrapped around the seed head. So that's called in the boot. Okay. And then the next thing that happens is that seed head comes out and that leaf lays over. And then you've got early head. Okay. We also ask people to manage alfalfa conservatively, not to cut alfalfa 4 weeks before a frost. So after about mid-September to 1st of October, it needs to rest, and it rests and charges up its carbs in the roots so that it can last through the winter, because it has to make it. It has to stay alive based on what it's stored. All right. So if we, and I will tell you that if you think about this class next October and you see an alfalfa field in mid-October, I guarantee you it probably looks the best it's looked all year long. And the temptation to cut it at that period of time is immense. I have seen many fields cut what I would consider the wrong time. But I told you, you don't get electrocuted, if you cut in that window. Just know that you have stressed the plant, and maybe you get a long, nice fall and it grows back and recharges the roots. You fertilized it well, you've controlled the pests. And so you're playing odds, you're balancing things so that alfalfa doesn't suffer too much. Okay. Last harvest in, September 15th, October 1, to avoid leaf shatter and loss. The pure alfalfa sample it's got a lot of leaf shatter. You can tell because we've got so much fine material in that bale. And that's by handling it when it's a little damp. Okay. So bale at the correct moisture. TED, which is a spinning implement that fluffs it back up if you choose to use that at higher moistures early in the morning. So if you got to manipulate the hay, right, you want it to be either have dew on it or still be in the drying curve when it's coming down. The really bad thing is maybe you get rain on that bale on the left and you've got to manipulate it in order to get that fluffed up again when it's almost dry. We'll quantify that, but the rain late in the harvest cycle is very damaging. Shortening the drying time is helpful. We get a limited number of good drying days in Kentucky. And so one of the ways that you do that is with the mower conditioner. And a mower conditioner is obviously a mowing machine that has one or two different types of conditioners behind the cutter device that will either crush the stems, or some of it has a flail that will actually try to scrape the stems. That's a lot more abrasive. And typically we don't see we would rather not use those on alfalfa or red clover because that spinning action of that flail knocks leaves off. Okay, and making baleage, which is wrapping wet hay, making silage, we only need about a day, sometimes two, but about a day. Okay, now getting alfalfa pictures with it in the bud is really hard. When you go out in the field and you're trying to figure out is it in the bud or not, the best way to do it, if you see in a flower, then you know it's past the bud stage, right? But if you don't see a flower and you know that you're 3.5 weeks in, run your finger up the stalk, and at the very end, you'll feel it thicken up. You'll feel kind of a knot in that end of that stem. And that's the bud before it comes out and flowers, okay? Now, there are several buds in here, and you can count them now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably as many stems as there are, but you can see it just a little right there, okay? And right there. Actually, that's probably a little bit of a bloom right here. The alfalfa does not necessarily bloom at the very top. So if you're trying to find where blooms are, you need to look all along the stem. Sometimes it happens down below the top, okay? The conditioner will break the stems and like this, and then you get more places for water to leave. The leaves dry out so fast and the stems dry out very slowly that we need that help with crops like alfalfa, red clover, and some others, okay? We'll talk about grazing alfalfa, and I was talking to Madeline before we started. Grazing alfalfa is a lot more of a thing than it used to be because we have a variety called alpha graze and subsequent generations of varieties like that. They were actually selected under real grazing pressure. They would plant, the nursery, the breeding block of various plants, and they would have them on a grid. They would know what they are, and then they would turn cattle out in there and graze them all the time, continuously, right? And the plants that lived, they got to make seed, and they kept that and crossed those in 2 or 3 cycles, and then they came up with a variety that sure enough would tolerate hoof traffic and defoliation better than what we would call hay types. But we can graze any kind of alfalfa. The secret to that is remembering the carb cycle, and that you need to harvest it every 30 days. So we're going to the point where we'll talk about being able to subdivide a field. And with grazing alfalfa, it's really important that if you do it well, to subdivide the field, because you're going to take your grazing animals, horses, cows, goats, whatever, and try to make them eat within a week everything in front of them, everything you want them to eat, okay? The quality on the top 6 inches is much greater than the quality on the next 6, and so on, all the way down. So you may choose, especially if growth is the be-all, end-all, that you don't want them to eat. Say you've got, let's pick an animal that needs a lot of energy, a stocker steer, or say an eventing horse, right, that is burning up a lot of energy. Lactating mare, burning up a lot of energy. Let them have the top half and move them to the next section. Follow up with maybe your easy keeping horses, the cows and that are dry, that are not milking. And then you can utilize that latter half, right, of the alfalfa or whatever else is there. And you've matched that up to the animal need. But with grazing alfalfa, we're going to try to get around that field in a month. If we're going to do this, and you're going to use that grazing animal like a harvest machine. The problem one of the big challenges with alfalfa that grows up in the spring, and you're going to graze it, right, is the fact that it's not like hay. You can't knock down the whole 30 acres at one time and graze it, boom, done, right? I've cut it all. Nope. You're going to take the animals you have, and they have a finite ability to eat, and they will eat what they can eat. And then if you wait until everything is at the right stage, like for hay, and you're going to graze it, then you'll get the first field when it's just exactly right. But then you've got a week there. A week later, this field, which was right the week before, is now full bloom. And by the time you get around to the last segment in that field, it's way over mature, okay? So the challenge in grazing, especially in the spring, is what we call setting up the stagger, which means you have to start somewhere too early, okay? And then move across the fields. And by the time you come back, you've allowed that one to rest 30 days, okay? We'll talk about that again, but that's the gist of grazing alfalfa is harvesting on a 30-day cycle which sounds simple, and it's at least moderately simple, but yet you can't, everything gets ready at the same time. And so you have to work out that pattern of grazing. So you start early somewhere in order to keep things in at least decent shape before you get done. And a lot of times you will graze part of it and you'll cut part of it for hay because it gets ahead of you in the spring. Okay. Okay. I am going to, this is good to show. This is a grazing tolerant variety on the right, like Alpha Graze. That's a grazing susceptible variety on the left. What we do here at Kentucky and have done for years is plant small plots, 5 by 15 foot plots that would ordinarily get harvested by a mowing machine. And we will get them up and we'll harvest them in the spring, and then we will stock them with cattle for the year. They just stay there, okay? And then we hammer them hard enough that we kill something. You know, it's not good if everything lives. You have to kill something, you know, because we want to see if there's a range of tolerance to grazing. So you can see that clearly that one variety is much more tolerant of grazing than another. And that doesn't mean that variety on the left is bad. It's just different, okay? Just different. Okay. Alfalfa is the queen of the forage crops, highest yielding, highest quality thing in Kentucky. You as a proud graduate of PLS 510 will be expected to understand alfalfa management good enough to at least, not open your mouth and remove all doubts about your knowledge right off the bat, right? Now, let me tell you, I hope you go out and you're able to get a job in agriculture and use every bit of the stuff that we've learned or you've learned here in this class. But let me tell you, you keep the book, you will look up more things than you will remember, and that's okay. All right. When you go make a visit to a farm, they never ask you what's in the book. Typically, they know what's in the book. You're going to get asked things that are not in the book. And it is perfectly okay to say, I do not know. I do not know. What do you think? And while they're talking, you think, because they will often have been up against that problem before. Well, anyway, free for nothing advice about how it works when you go to work. It was a shock, I'll tell you, when I went to work and I was supposed to be the expert. And it took 9 months for somebody to ask me something I knew. 9 months. It was disgusting. I'm telling you, it was forgettable. Okay. Jana, Alyssa, Minley, Tate. How are you doing? Alyssa, did you get all that?
Yep, I did.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I kind of got slowed down. I'm significantly behind, but that's okay. Jana, okay?
Yep, feeling pretty good. Thank you.
Okay, all right, just checking in. All right, Tate, so have you been out in any alfalfa in your travels with Glenn down there?
Yeah, we've been out a little bit. We've mostly been going to a couple different farms, and we've got a few people wanting to add sheep.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about small ruminants a little bit before we quit today. Minley, have you seen alfalfa growing in the field?
No.
Okay. No charge. No charge. It's not as prevalent as maybe as you'd like it to be, but it's a beautiful crop. I took some pictures of what it looks like right now, breaking dormancy, and I'll put those up come class day next. So I want to at least get started on small ruminants today. This is the handout that we have in class today. Let's get this up on the screen. Okay. We have talked about species and, and kind of, I won't say in the weeds, but you have to kind of understand enough about the species for systems to start making sense. Okay. So now from here on out, we will talk usually at the system level. So we're going to talk about small ruminants, sheep and goats. We'll talk about beef cattle to some degree, although you can't really talk about forages without thinking about and giving, setting the context with whatever livestock enterprise you're talking about. So we're going to get into this next, and it will be Friday, but we'll get into that and we'll talk about forage considerations for small ruminants. Now, just as a way of maybe me getting my bearings here, I'm going to stop the share because there's not much point in that. Is anybody familiar, very familiar with sheep or goats? Shout it out. Anybody online?
I wish.
Okay. I'm not either. I'm not either. So I have to study this every time we get to this unit and think it through, because I've internalized many things about a horse or a cow or a steer. But sheep and goats are a little different. But as you'll figure out, it's a whole lot the same too. It's a whole lot the same. So, I posted last night the homework assignment that I've been threatening for a long time, and that is the ones where we're going to calculate cost per acre and seeds per square foot. I want you to have a general sense of how much it costs to seed certain things per acre, and I want you to have a general sense of, when you put out the recommended seeding rate, how many seeds per square foot is that? And I'll find out if you're surprised or not. Okay. Okay. That is all. So I will see you on Friday. Y'all be good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.